The applause should have felt like relief. Instead, it landed on me like something misplaced, applause arriving after the damage had already been done. I stood under the lights, smiling because my body knew how to do that even when my mind had gone completely still. Cameras loved stillness. They punished hesitation. Inside me, something was cracking open. I could feel it, that precise, sinking sensation when truth slips out of reach, but everyone else keeps running with it. My words were polished. My tone controlled. But the foundation beneath them was wrong, and I knew it before the moderator finished the follow-up question. The data didn't align. The framing was distorted. And the logic I was defending was not mine. I answered anyway. That was the mistake. The correction came swiftly, surgically. My opponent didn't raise his voice. He didn't gloat. He simply dismantled the claim piece by piece, calmly citing realities I should have known. The silence that followed was unbearable, not hostile, just disappointed. The kind reserved for someone who should have known better. I did know better. That was the worst part. As the broadcast cut to break, I felt the humiliation bloom fully. Not explosive, but precise. Not emotional, but intellectual. I wasn't embarrassed because I was loud or sloppy. I was embarrassed because I had trusted borrowed certainty. Ian's certainty. He had handed me those talking points with confidence, with that familiar smile that suggested I was supported, protected, aligned with something larger. I had wanted to believe him, not because I couldn't think, but because trusting him felt easier than standing alone with my own conclusions. When the lights dimmed, people avoided my eyes. Ian didn't. He approached me with rehearsed concern, already shaping the narrative in his head. I watched his face carefully, then not listening, just observing. The way his concern never quite reached his eyes. The speed with which he framed the moment as unfortunate, rather than wrong. That was when the obsession broke. Not with him, with the image of him. I saw it clearly. How much of my competence I had been quietly outsourcing. How often I had allowed proximity to power to substitute for verification. How easily respect had turned into reliance. By the time I reached my office, the shame had burned away into something colder and far more useful. Clarity. If I was going to be publicly wrong, it would never again be because I trusted someone else's version of the truth over my own discipline. I had survived humiliation. I could survive honesty. When Ian later complained about his secure earpiece malfunctioning, irritated, dismissive, distracted, I volunteered to take it. Not because I wanted to help, but because something in me had already shifted from defense to investigation. And I had learned the cost of not checking what you're handed. The earpiece arrived at my office in a small, unassuming case, the kind Ian liked, sleek, discreet, entirely unremarkable. I carried it carefully to my desk, aware of how delicate it seemed compared to the magnitude of what I already suspected. It was supposed to be a routine fix. Nothing dramatic. Nothing personal. Just electronics. But instinct, that sharp edge that had been honed in the aftermath of public humiliation, whispered something different. Something off. I didn't touch the buttons at first. I simply examined the device. Sleek surface, exactly as Ian had described, yet my gut rejected the explanation that this was a mere malfunction. I knew him too well, the obsession with control, the constant need to monitor, to anticipate every outcome. Malfunction was too convenient. Too neat. I slipped the device open, careful not to damage anything. And that's when I saw it, a small recorder tucked underneath the wiring. Compact, hidden, not part of the standard design. My chest tightened. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't Ian. Not entirely. I touched the recorder gently, scanning the small label for a date. Recent. Very recent. Someone had installed it, or used it with intention. My mind raced, thinking of possible explanations, but each one collapsed under the weight of probability. There was only one conclusion that fit cleanly. It was deliberate. Deliberate manipulation. I paused and let myself breathe. This wasn't fear. Not really. It was awareness. Clarity, honed by my earlier public humiliation. This small device, meant to be an aid, was a window into a plan. Someone had orchestrated something behind the scenes, and the evidence had been hiding in plain sight. I connected the recorder to my computer and downloaded the files. Each click revealed more. Small pieces, conversations, careful instructions. Voices I knew. Voices I trusted. And then, unmistakably, Ian's voice, speaking with the same ease he always used to inspire confidence. But he wasn't alone. Victoria, Ian's former mentor, the one everyone whispered about, brilliant, ruthless, admired. The conversation was casual, almost intimate in tone, and horrifying. Victoria's words sliced cleanly through any illusions I'd been clinging to. The plan is simple. Let Hazel take the heat on the public forum. She's replaceable. Once you secure the seat, we announce our engagement and consolidate our power. It's always been about our legacy, Ian. My stomach twisted, a mix of rage and grim clarity. They had never cared about me, not truly. I wasn't a partner. I was a placeholder, a tool to absorb scrutiny while they maneuvered their power play behind the scenes. I leaned back, hands gripping the edges of my desk, mind calculating the next step. Public humiliation had sparked my rebirth. But this cold, deliberate betrayal demanded action. Not blind revenge. Not passive resentment. Strategic, precise, unyielding action. For the first time since the debate, I felt excitement. Sharp, electric, focused. I knew exactly who could help me. Leo Thorne, my childhood rival. Our history had been one of grudges and competition, but I had always respected his mind. Ruthless, brilliant, impeccably strategic. He would know how to wield this chaos, to turn the betrayal into leverage, to ensure that Ian and Victoria faced consequences that were public, permanent, and undeniable. The recorder's files weren't just evidence. They were my weapon. And for the first time since that debate, I felt power returning to my hands. I spent the night listening, rewinding, and cataloging the recordings. Each playback revealed a layer of intent that was more unsettling than the last. Ian and Victoria's conversation wasn't careless. It wasn't even defensive. It was meticulous, rehearsed, and cruelly patient. Every syllable was designed to ensure I would take the fall while they maneuvered toward the ultimate prize: control, influence, and consolidation of power. Victoria's voice was the coldest. She spoke with an authority that was nearly intoxicating in its clarity, instructing Ian on the precise lies he should tell, the manipulations he should employ, the exact moments when I would be set up to stumble. "She's replaceable," she repeated, a phrase that lodged itself in my mind like a jagged stone. I had thought I mattered. I had believed in trust, in loyalty. But the recording erased every comforting illusion I had held about either of them. Ian's voice, usually so sure, now sounded smaller, complicit, almost obedient. His charm, the foundation I had relied on to navigate uncertainty, was revealed as performance, a calculated tool, not an expression of sincerity. The plan had always been about him, about legacy, about consolidation of power. My humiliation, the public spectacle of my supposed failure, had been orchestrated from behind the scenes. I leaned back in my chair and let the enormity of it sink in. I felt rage, yes, but it was sharpened, focused. There was no room for wasted emotion anymore. There was only strategy. Public humiliation had sparked my rebirth, and this revelation had given it purpose. I wasn't just a victim. I was an observer now, equipped with the raw truth and the leverage it carried. The clarity that followed was almost frightening in its precision. Every misstep Ian had encouraged me to take was intentional. Every false talking point had been a trap. Every public embarrassment was calculated. They assumed I would be too loyal, too trusting, too invested in appearances to see beyond the smoke. They were wrong. And as I listened to the final segment of the recording, where Victoria outlined the timeline for their engagement announcement, I realized something even more chilling. I was not merely replaceable. I was irrelevant to them. They had counted on my silence, my compliance, and my ego to absorb scrutiny, while they advanced unscathed. That's when I began plotting not revenge, but reclamation. I would not allow their manipulation to define my career, my competence, or my reputation. I would act decisively, strategically, and ruthlessly. The tools were in my hands: proof, clarity, and the knowledge that they had underestimated me entirely. The only question remaining was how to execute it. There was only one person I could call on, someone who could match my intellect with equal cunning, someone who respected strategy above sentiment, someone who had always understood me even when we had been rivals: Leo Thorne. The thought of contacting him brought an unexpected thrill. In the past, we had sparred over politics, influence, and ideas. He had always been brilliant, ruthless, and unflinching. If anyone could turn this web of betrayal into leverage that would publicly expose Ian and Victoria while protecting my career, it was him. For the first time in months, I felt anticipation. Not fear. Not anger. Anticipation. The kind that signals the shift from reaction to action, from victim to strategist. I saved the recordings, encrypted them, and prepared my message to Leo. It was time to change the game, and I stared at my screen for a long moment, hesitating only slightly before typing Leo Thorne's name into the recipient line. We had not spoken in years, not since our rivalry had reached its apex, a time of sharp words, public debates, and private grudges that had almost burned bridges irreparably. And yet, in the quiet aftermath of betrayal, he was the only one I trusted to wield truth strategically rather than sentimentally. The email was deliberate, precise. I laid out the situation without exaggeration: Ian's manipulation, Victoria's orchestration, the recordings themselves, and the implications for both my reputation and theirs. I did not beg. I did not plead. I did not ask for moral guidance. I asked for execution, the cold, meticulous kind that would turn exposure into leverage. Sending it felt like stepping off a ledge, but I had learned that hesitation was the ally of manipulators. They counted on hesitation. They depended on it. I had spent years letting their confidence shape my choices. Now it would be my strategy that defined the narrative. Within hours, a reply arrived. Short, concise, almost unnervingly casual. Finally. About time. Send me everything you have. Chaos is always most effective when you're ready. I read it twice. His tone carried the same edge of controlled excitement I remembered from our rivalry, the same respect for strategy, for precision, for intellect. And I realized how much I had missed that kind of engagement, even in conflict. Over the next days, Leo and I worked in a quiet, deliberate cadence. I provided the recordings, organized them meticulously, and annotated critical moments. He asked questions that drew out nuances I had not initially noticed. Together, we mapped the path of exposure: what to release, when, and how to ensure the fallout protected me while dismantling Ian and Victoria's credibility. It was intoxicating. Not in the rush of drama, but in the alignment of minds. Two strategists, finally unrestrained by ego, loyalty, or fear, shaping the consequences of deception with surgical precision. And all the while, I felt a growing awareness of him. Not the rival, not the enemy, but the partner in clarity. The dynamic spark between us was undeniable, subtle but persistent. It wasn't romance yet, not the kind that sweeps you off your feet. It was a recognition of equality, respect, and the thrill of shared cunning. Finally, the plan moved from theory to action. Leo released the recordings through channels that ensured maximum exposure. Ian's policy manipulations were public, Victoria's professional ethics were questioned, and the narrative was unmistakably clear: betrayal had been orchestrated, not accidental. The consequences were immediate. Ian's confidence crumbled under scrutiny, his election campaign faltered. Victoria faced inquiries and censure from her professional board. And I, for the first time in months, watched without fear, without shame, without dependence. I had survived public humiliation. I had uncovered betrayal. And now, with Leo as an unexpected ally, I was reclaiming my competence and control, strategically, ruthlessly, entirely on my own terms. For the first time since the debate, I smiled. Not for the cameras. Not for Ian or Victoria. For myself. The aftermath of the leak was immediate, but not theatrical. Ian's carefully curated public image fractured in subtle, irreversible ways. He no longer spoke with the same authority. His words hesitated, faltered, and lost their weight. Every appearance, every press release, carried the invisible shadow of exposure. People noticed, journalists, colleagues, even voters. A confidence, once his armor, had become his vulnerability. Victoria's response was different. Calculated, measured, professional, but hollow. She maintained her composure in public, but the inquiries into her ethical conduct were unavoidable. Boards and committees began to question her decisions, the integrity of her guidance, and the morality of the tactics she had advised. Her reputation, like Ian's, was no longer untouchable. Meanwhile, Leo and I watched it unfold with precision, almost clinical in our observation. Our role was complete in one sense, yet the work we did together had shifted something deeper. I had entered this collaboration for strategy, but I discovered a kind of intimacy born not of romance, but of alignment. A shared understanding of tactics, risk, and intellect that was rare and unshakable. There were moments when I caught myself observing him more closely than necessary. The subtle ways he approached problems, the efficiency in his decisions, the controlled intensity that reminded me of every reason we had once clashed. And in that recognition, a quiet, unspoken connection began to form. Not urgent, not demanding, but undeniably present. The public no longer needed me to defend myself. I was not the scapegoat anymore. I had transformed into the authority of my own narrative. The embarrassment that had once burned so fiercely became irrelevant, replaced by clarity and a sense of control. I had turned exposure into empowerment. At the same time, I realized how much I had underestimated my own capacity to act decisively. Leo's presence amplified it, but the initiative had always been mine. The recordings, the careful analysis, the strategic release, those had been my choices. The power I felt wasn't borrowed. It was reclaimed. Even in quiet moments, away from the fallout, the tension of collaboration lingered. Sitting across from Leo in the early evening, we reviewed the last details of the leaks, confirming that every point aligned with our goal of exposing deception. His focus was magnetic, yet steady. I noticed how natural it felt to work alongside someone who neither demanded nor questioned my intelligence, someone who understood it instinctively. The day Ian publicly admitted missteps in a weak statement, barely salvaging his career, I felt no triumph. No revenge was needed. Reality had taken care of itself. Victoria faced disciplinary action quietly but effectively, and the professional world adjusted its perception of both figures accordingly. I had survived humiliation. I had discovered betrayal. And now, I had crafted consequences with the precision of someone who had finally mastered her own authority. The quiet satisfaction that followed was not empty. It was a recognition of my own rebirth, competent, unshakable, and fiercely autonomous. And somewhere between the strategy sessions and shared glances with Leo, I realized that power, intellect, and subtle connection could coexist, forming a bond that was formidable, respected, and quietly magnetic. In the days that followed the leak, the world seemed to slow around me, as if the chaos had been concentrated into a single, precise point and then released. Ian's campaign floundered, Victoria's firm was under scrutiny, and the media cycles moved past them, but I stayed. Watching, learning, understanding the rhythm of consequence when wielded deliberately. I spent hours in my office, alone at first, going over timelines, messages, and recordings. Not to relive the betrayal, but to internalize the lessons. I had been humbled, yes, but not broken. That distinction was important. Humility can sharpen. Brokenness only diminishes. Leo's presence became a quiet constant. Not intrusive, not commanding, just there, the kind of partnership I had never experienced. Our minds aligned in ways that were effortless, flowing naturally between observation and strategy. Working alongside him wasn't collaboration, it was synergy. And the subtle tension, the recognition of each other's intellect, was exhilarating. I realized something unexpected. Power didn't have to be loud to be effective. It didn't require the public's applause or validation. True influence was quiet, controlled, and intelligent. I had been obsessed with perception for so long, with how Ian or anyone else would judge my decisions, that I had neglected the strength in quiet competence. Evenings became our time, not for plotting, not for gossip, not even for strategy in the strict sense. We discussed systems, human behavior, the intricacies of influence and control. Conversations that were once debates filled with friction were now exercises in mutual understanding. I felt respected in a way I had never expected, and it made the growing attraction, subtle, simmering, feel natural rather than urgent. One night, after reviewing a final set of release protocols for the last recordings, Leo leaned back in his chair and gave a rare, small smile. It wasn't the mischievous smirk of a rival. It was acknowledgement, understanding, a recognition of the transformation that had occurred in the world and in me. "Hazel," he said quietly, almost conversationally, "you handled that beautifully. You didn't just survive, you controlled it." I met his gaze, noticing for the first time the depth in his eyes, the intensity that always existed behind the precision. I didn't respond verbally. I just allowed the moment to linger. There was no rush, no expectation. Just understanding, mutual respect, and a sense of shared accomplishment that transcended words. That night, I slept with clarity in my mind and confidence in my chest. The humiliation, the betrayal, and the public spectacle had become fuel for strategic rebirth. I had reclaimed my authority, my reputation, and, quietly, my sense of personal power. And the attraction that had begun to simmer between Leo and me, it didn't need to be rushed. It didn't need dramatic declarations. It was there, a quiet undercurrent, born from respect, shared intelligence, and the thrill of surviving and thriving through betrayal. I had been reborn once in humiliation, but now I was reborn again in quiet, controlled strength. The days blurred into a rhythm of calculated calm and quiet anticipation. Leo and I worked together like two parts of a machine built for precision. Every step of exposing Ian and Victoria's schemes was methodical, controlled, and deliberate. But amidst the strategy, there was a current I couldn't ignore, a subtle pull between us that had nothing to do with politics or revenge. It began in small, unnoticed ways. The way his hand brushed mine when we reached for the same document. The way his gaze lingered just a moment longer than necessary when I explained a detail. The corners of his mouth that curved ever so slightly when my analysis impressed him, a rare acknowledgement of competence, sincere and unadorned. One evening, after finalizing a particularly intricate plan, we stayed late in the office. Lights dimmed, the city skyline flickering in the background. Leo leaned back in his chair, stretching, and I felt the tension of hours of work dissolve into something warmer, something unspoken but palpable. "You handled that debate like a master," he said quietly. "Not just surviving, controlling it." I smiled faintly, feeling the compliment settle deeper than I expected. "I had good guidance," I replied, though my words felt inadequate. It wasn't guidance. It was alignment, two minds meeting in the rarest way, perfectly calibrated. He leaned closer, subtly, until our shoulders brushed. The contact sent a pulse through me, electric and undeniable. My pulse quickened, but I did not pull away. For the first time, proximity didn't feel threatening. It felt right. "I underestimated you once," Leo admitted softly, his voice low, intimate. "I thought you were predictable." "Predictable?" I repeated, smirking despite myself. He chuckled, shaking his head. "No. That's the thing, you're not. I respect that. I respect you." The sincerity in his tone, the quiet power of it, disarmed me. My heartbeat slowed, but only because I allowed it, allowed the warmth, the intimacy, the possibility. I leaned slightly toward him, closing the gap enough to feel the heat of his presence, the faint scent of his cologne. "I've learned not to be underestimated," I whispered. He smiled, that quiet, genuine smile that revealed more than words ever could. And then, finally, almost imperceptibly, he reached for my hand. I did not hesitate. Our fingers intertwined, natural and deliberate, as if we had always belonged in that precise alignment. For the first time in months, I felt entirely safe. Not because nothing could hurt me, but because someone had chosen to stand alongside me, intellectually, strategically, and now intimately. There was trust in the touch, an unspoken acknowledgement of boundaries, respect, and mutual desire. We stayed like that for a long moment, hands entwined, minds connected, a quiet heat simmering between us. Strategy had brought us together, but what grew now was something more, an understanding that intimacy, like power, required precision, patience, and respect. As we finally pulled back, still close enough to feel each other's presence, I realized that this was different from any past romance. There was no need to rush. No grand declarations. Just two people, aligned in mind, strategy, and heart, standing side by side in the aftermath of chaos. And for the first time, I truly believed that the partnership I had feared might never come, one that honored both intellect and desire, was finally real. The city lights flickered through the blinds, painting the office in soft gold and silver. Leo and I sat across from each other, the silence no longer awkward but charged, a quiet testament to all that had passed between us. The recordings were released, Ian's missteps were public, and Victoria faced scrutiny that would redefine her career. Justice, executed with precision, had arrived. And yet, the victory was not the intoxicating kind I had once imagined. It wasn't loud. It wasn't about headlines or applause. It was the calm satisfaction of competence regained. Mine. Entirely mine. I had survived humiliation, exposed betrayal, and emerged not just unbroken but reborn. Leo leaned back in his chair, watching me with an intensity one had come to recognize as both respect and something more, something intimate. There was no game now, no rivalry. Only awareness, connection, and the slow, deliberate heat of attraction that had been simmering for weeks. I have to admit, he said quietly, leaning forward slightly, I underestimated how effective you'd be under pressure. I smiled, a small, knowing smile. You always underestimated me, I replied, reaching across the desk. My hand met his, firm and steady. Our fingers intertwined naturally, the kind of touch that doesn't need words. He held my gaze, and in that look, I saw acknowledgement of intellect, of strength, of autonomy, and desire, tempered by respect. There was no need for pretense, no power games or manipulations. This was the real alignment. Hearts and minds in sync, both recognizing the other's value without diminishment. Later, as we walked through the empty corridors of the building, our hands still lightly brushing, I realized how far I had come. The humiliation that had once threatened to define me was now nothing more than a lesson etched into memory. The betrayal that had seemed so consuming was now the catalyst for my most precise, deliberate victory, and for something unexpected. Partnership, in every sense of the word. We stopped at the rooftop, the city sprawling beneath us. The night air was cool, tinged with the scent of rain and possibility. Leo looked at me, not with calculation this time, but with something softer, almost tender. I didn't expect this, he said, voice low, that we'd end up here. Together. Neither did I admitted, leaning slightly closer. But sometimes the best outcomes aren't the ones you plan, they're the ones you build carefully, piece by piece. His hand brushed my cheek, light and deliberate, and I leaned into it without hesitation. The kiss that followed was slow, grounded in trust, passion, and the acknowledgement of shared victories. It wasn't frantic or fleeting. It was the kind of kiss that felt like a seal, a promise of mutual respect and desire interwoven. Pulling back slightly, we smiled at each other, not because we needed validation, but because we recognized the journey that had brought us here. The chaos, the betrayal, the exposure, it had all led to this. Clarity, strategy, and the kind of intimacy built on equality and shared strength. For the first time, I felt entirely unshakable. I had my confidence, my independence, and now, a partner who matched me in intellect, ambition, and heart. The future stretched before us, unpredictable yet thrilling. But for the first time, I faced it not with fear, not with reliance on borrowed certainty, but with the deliberate, controlled confidence of a woman who had reclaimed herself and found love and alignment along the way. We stood together, overlooking the city, hand in hand, knowing that whatever came next, we would face it with intellect, passion, and unwavering trust. And in that quiet triumph, I finally understood what rebirth truly meant: power reclaimed, betrayal exposed, and a future built on truth, strategy, and love.